Hello, YNABers. My name is Jesse Meekum, and this is podcast number 453 for YNAB, where we teach you 4 rules to help you stop living paycheck to paycheck, get out of debt, and save more money. A lot of the time, what we're facing is something very large. We're talking about big behavior change, big strides in making and having a lasting, big financial impact on us, perhaps on our kids, and maybe even leaving a legacy along with that. Today, I am pleased to tell you that I have with me, pre-recorded, author Robyn Conley Downs. She is, well, you know what? Let me just make this official. Let me just read you her bio, because the interview that follows is impressive. So more on that in just one moment. Robyn Conley Downs is a speaker, educator, entrepreneur, podcaster, and author of The Feel Good Effect: Reclaim Your Wellness by Creating Small Shifts That Create Big Change. Holding a master's degree in education with an emphasis in behavior change and 4 years of public policy and health change at the doctoral level, her work taps into cutting-edge science around psychology, neuroscience, mindfulness, and habits. She was recently named one of the most influential women in wellness. She believes that small shifts in thinking and action create big change in life. I love that. Small shifts in action and thinking can create big changes in life. So, well, I will say one thing. The part that we get to where you think about your self-talk versus how you would talk to a friend, that alone was killer. And I've caught myself in recent days doing just that to myself. So without further ado, Robyn Conley Downs.
Well, my name's Robyn, and I am so excited about this particular conversation, actually, because I have not been on a podcast talking about the relationship with mindset and habits to money and budgeting and that whole area. So I'm really excited to dive into that with you today. My background's actually started in professionally almost more than 20 years ago. And my training was first I did a degree in political science, and then I added this emphasis in behavior change, so how people create and maintain habits and the interventions around that. So I spent the first part of my career working with programming around that, individuals, therapy, all of those things. And then as I went through my career, I decided that when you look at behavior change or how we create and maintain habits, that's taught through the individual level, so what we individually can do. But of course, we don't exist outside in some vacuum. We actually exist in systems or in organizations. So I wanted to look at policy as well. So I did a PhD in policy and public affairs. So I had all of this academic training, and I worked at a university, did all this research. But in my own life, I was having trouble applying it. I was working like 60 hours a week. I was in school. I was a new mom. And I wasn't actually applying any of it. And I realized part of that was because of the way that a lot of research is written is not to be applicable for people. It's to be available to other researchers. But also just my approach in general wasn't serving me any longer. Kind of the way I'd approached life to become successful as an academic and as a professional wasn't really working in my life. So I did a lot of work to say, like, what's really going on here? How can I simplify this for myself? Came up with a method and a mindset, and then have a podcast, have a website, and then wrote this book because I thought, hey, if I'm having this problem, I'm guessing other people are as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the phrases that I've caught as I kind of dove in a little bit with what you're doing. One, I mean, we're, listeners of this podcast, they're trying to do better with their money, gain more control around their money, improve in some way. And we're all in different spots along the spectrum of, and even with different definitions of what financial improvement or success may look like. Mm. But there's one bucket you could very neatly put us all into where we're trying to change some behavior. We don't like how we've behaved with money in the past, and we want to improve that. But you have a phrase where you said you want less striving, more ease. And normally, and maybe it's just like the American culture or maybe my own upbringing, but normally we're always striving. Like that's a very desirable where, oh, look how they're just striving for whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And it seems like you lived that. How do you, maybe you can elaborate that on, like, how do we have less striving, more ease. And why? Why would we want that?
Yeah. And it's a combination of various things, but typically striving is used in a very positive way, like we're striving for success or for more financial freedom. My, I think, issue with what creates striving is that it doesn't necessarily lead to sustainable results. And also the process along the way is typically really, really, really difficult and not full of joy and not full of ease. And we know from human behavior that if you can force yourself to do something for a short amount of time, but if you want it to work long term, you can't just be pushing yourself to do something that sucks. So it's not when you take away striving, it's not taking away results. So people still want to have results. They still want to have growth in their life, but it's approaching it a little differently. And really, as you mentioned, some of the underpinnings of U.S. culture, while those can be helpful in small doses, when overdone, we see over and over that that's kind of what keeps people from that long-term success. So it's not to say you can't be working for something or growth or results, but it's just coming at it from a different way of thinking and a different approach that we know from the research is more sustainable.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about what that looks like. What is one thing that you'd say the traditional approach is this for behavior change? We find this, however, is more sustainable.
Yeah, and traditional behavior change actually doesn't really look at the neuroscience of how we approach things. It's really more like that typical, if you've read any of Duhigg's work or James Clear, they're really great at distilling this typical traditional behavior analysis of, cue, behavior, reward, that basic of behavior change. And that is still true. But what I'm adding is the way that we approach that is actually really important. So, for example, I know I'm getting probably a little bit in the clouds. So I'll give you an example. So part of striving in the way we approach behavior change or habit formation that we see over and over is all or nothing thinking. So all in or all out. And it's very common whether you're trying to change behavior around money, budgeting, health, wellness, exercise. We really have an ingrained tendency to want to go big or go home. And that whole big go home thing usually ends up in going home, right? Because we can't sustain it. So instead of all or nothing, we can train our brain toward more flexible thinking or a middle ground. So as you're trying to develop those new habits, you can catch yourself when you're in that go big moment and maybe bring it back to something that's a little bit more aligned. So it's still that same concept of behavior change. It's just adding, in my mind, like a base level, a base layer, like a foundation for your house. So if the habits are the beams of your house, this mindset is the foundation.
That's interesting. The people that successfully go big are probably your Olympians or elite athletes. And there's we know just numbers wise, they're so few and far between. And even then you would maybe look and say, is that healthy, right? Is that person
such a good point. Such a good point. So there are, and we really reward those strivers who have sacrificed everything. And I'm like, hey, good for them. They sacrificed everything and they accomplished this thing. I don't personally want to sacrifice everything. But also eventually most of those people, you'll see that kind of burnout. I think of someone like Michael Phelps or, his colleagues in the swimming, U.S. swimming. Most of them they retire young, and a lot of them talk about later what their life was like in that program, and it's really, really challenging for mental health. So I'm never saying that I still think you can accomplish some really great things with this alternative way, but also, yes, for the majority of us, that all-in approach, there's just so few people that can maintain that. And those are who we hold up. But there's for every one of them, there's 100 of the rest of us who can't maintain that. So we need something else, a different way to do it.
Yeah. So if we've got someone that's maybe, well, I do want to get to shame a little bit, but because you had a really nice line in there. But I wanted to maybe just pose a hypothetical that is, or a composite financial situation where you have a person who just for whatever reason, they look back and they suddenly realize overnight it feels that they now have $16,000 in credit card debt. And for some reason, now is the moment where they decide. And we have this kind of unique moment in time where that person is not just aware of the situation, but also feeling like, I can do this. I can do something about it. So they're unique, and we want to make sure we capitalize on that. What is if someone's thinking go big, go home, kind of all or nothing, what is a trap that a person saying, I want to tackle this credit card debt, what is a trap that they would look out for? Could you maybe translate that model that you have into that specific kind of situation?
Yes, love it. So let me give you an analogy, and then we'll talk about that. So the analogy is somebody who decides to change everything about the way they're eating. Maybe it's very similar, where you've been in these old set of habits. You've developed patterns around the kinds of food you're eating. Maybe you're going through the drive-thru every day. You're not moving your body, so no exercise. And one day you got up and you look in the mirror and you think, oh my gosh, how did I get here? Mm-hmm. I'm not happy with this. This doesn't serve me. I need to change. And you look and you know this is the moment. But then that initial burst of motivation runs up against the wall of like really how far you have to go, because whether it's about changing your habits with food and exercise, you've been practicing those habits for a really long time. And what we know from the neuroscience is you've actually developed literally in your brain pathways that have gotten you there. And to change them, it's possible, but it's not nothing to change the way you think. Yeah. It's actually, people underestimate that part a little bit. And then when you run into the sort of immense task of undoing those habits that you've done for so many years, it can get real. That initial burst of motivation is not enough to keep you going on the daily when you start to kind of start climbing that hill. And similarly, you may wake up and say, you know what? This is the day. Yeah. This debt is not me. It's not the way I want to do things. And you know that you can do it and you have that motivation. But then you forget about the part that it's not just about motivation. It's actually about changing the behavior, which I know you teach, and also giving yourself space to make those small shifts so that you can create the big change. When we try to change everything all at once, whether it's the way we eat or the way we do things with money, most of the time we try to do too much, and then we can't sustain that because we don't have the systems in place and the mindset in place. And then we kind of fall back into own patterns. And you mentioned shame. We start beating ourselves up. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I knew that I was actually that person who couldn't get a handle on my money. Yeah. And now I know that's true. And, screw it. Like I'm going to be in debt, or I'm never going to change the way I eat. And that is where I want to really get in there with people, because it's not just woo manifesting. It's like literal brain science, and it can change, but you kind of need you just need the right tools and to know that it's not enough to just be like, I'm motivated. Yay. You need a little bit more than that. And just depending on that motivation is going to be really tough to sustain for the long haul.
I read Angela Duckworth's book Grit a couple years ago, I think. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to kind of parallel that, like this idea of kind of persevering versus the idea of willpower, right? Where I see willpower as fleeting, and I see grit as a fruit of systems that are lasting. Yes. I could not eat dessert. Like if my goal were, I won't eat sugar or something, I could not eat sugar for today, guaranteed, 100% success rate. But if you were to say, well, could you do it 100 days in a row? I'd be like, oh, I don't know. That would depend, And so, how would someone go about, letting go of that. Well, I mean, you'd said we kind of want to leave shame and lean into joy was your word. If someone's trying to pay off their credit card debt and it's going slower, or heaven forbid, it actually they go back into a little bit of debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can you do to keep yourself from that negative self-talk, that like I knew I was this person, right? That identification.
Yeah. So, Jesse, you'll have to tell me if this seems like the most wild thing you've ever heard, but because I just love that we're having this conversation. The research is really clear, and the thing is to learn self-compassion. So kindness to yourself. And I very much guess that this might be the first ever money podcast episode that includes self-compassion in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like medicine, and it works incredibly well. So people who practice self-compassion or learn this way of thinking are more productive. They're less likely to procrastinate. They're more likely to stick with something when it doesn't go the way they want. So they're more likely to stick with something if they set a goal and then maybe they don't meet the goal, or maybe they backslide on the goal. So in the example of, you are going to pay off your credit card debt, you have a great game plan, and then something goes completely out of plan. Like, for example, a pandemic happens,
maybe, yeah.
and you lose your job, and that's not your fault. And it wasn't because you weren't working hard enough, or that you weren't motivated, or that you didn't have willpower. It was just a really unfortunate series of events. Being able to treat yourself with kindness, and not that kindness isn't weak, and it's not quitting, and it's not going to make it so you don't work hard. It's actually just going to create a container for you to stay with it long enough to come back, so that spiral doesn't get you. That's what I just want people to understand. Like that shame spiral, or that beating yourself up spiral when something doesn't go right, is often what keeps us from the success that we're looking for. And learning that kindness is shown over and over again to help us get past that point and know that, you know what, it's human to set a goal to pay off your debt. And then it's not like some perfect monthly, every month I pay off the exact same amount. Like there's probably, you know this better than anyone. When you work with people, do people pay the exact same amount off every month? And does it keep getting more and more? Or do they have times where like they're making progress and then it goes down and up? When you work with people, you probably say, hey, that's normal. You're doing it right. When it's ourselves, we say, God, what is wrong with you? Why can't you just be better? Why can't you just pay this off on the progressive scale? So when you can learn that self-compassion, I mean, some people are very resistant to that concept.
Why?
But all I can tell them, because we've learned, well, yeah, let's talk about it. When you hear that, what is your response, Jesse, when I say like learning self-compassion will help you persevere when things get difficult and come back without shame spiraling?
My very first like razor's edge reaction is soft. It's like there's something soft about that. I could come quickly around and be like, oh, no, that's not an accurate approach. There's something there where I want it to be a little. Well, you meant like what else caught me was you mentioned people that practice self-compassion are more productive, and then we just finished talking about striving, and now we're talking about productivity, which are almost one and the same. Although striving and being productive are not the same. You could group them, but you could strive and be terribly unproductive. So it's interesting that you have that research there that's saying someone is more productive, less likely to procrastinate if they're kinder to themselves. You may think, and I'm sure this is false, but one might think, oh, if you're too kind to yourself, you're giving yourself an out. You're not sticking to it. And so, yeah, I'd want to have you maybe elaborate on that more, or maybe literally, like, are we talking about mental thoughts? Are we talking about journaling? Like, how can we be kinder to ourselves? What are some like just brass tacks things one could do?
Yeah, so it is mental thoughts, and the way to retrain thought patterns is through learning some different ways of responding to your own thoughts, and also journaling is a great way to do it. Um, and it so yes, I mean productivity and striving, like we could separate them out, but the reason I give that example is because most people when they hear about self-compassion, they say exactly what you said: soft, weak, easy way out. And that's because we've been conditioned to think that the only way to get results or to succeed is by being hard on yourself. I mean, if you
Mm-hmm.
were, I was a high school athlete. I played basketball, and my coach was also a football coach. He did not believe that being kind to yourself was going to make us better
Yeah.
players. He believed that by berating us and embarrassing us and shaming us, that we would be motivated.
Hmm.
What we know, and so if that's how you've been raised or you've been in some organized place and that's how you've been taught, then that's what we
Mm-hmm.
think. So to hear that there's a different way, it just seems like, no, that'll take my edge off,
Mm.
like that, or that'll make me quit. Um, but there's over several thousands of studies on self-compassion and how when people learn it, a way of thinking, as you mentioned, they don't quit and they don't take the easy way out. But when it comes to like whether it's productivity or budgeting, they continue to do when things get hard. So not productivity for productivity's sake, but productivity for this in this spirit of this got hard. And instead of beating myself up or shaming myself or thinking I'm the only one that has ever made this mistake, I know that I'm human, I make mistakes, and I show up again the next day.
Yeah. So a way I could catch myself is if I'm having these negative thoughts, or our hypothetical person, they went back into debt a little bit and they're just full of failure, this feeling of failure. If they came to me and said, Jesse, this happened, I would tell them a very different thing than what they are telling themselves.
Yes.
And so it's interesting that, and you would give advice to a friend about eating better or, name your thing that you may not necessarily give to yourself, but it's good advice. And so it's funny that we in a way, we tend to treat others far better with our words than we treat ourselves with our internal words, I guess.
Jesse, you just summarized like 50 years of self-compassion research without even knowing it. I love it. You're like a Zen master. So absolutely 100% true. We are better at showing and speaking compassion to others, especially in our close circle,
Mm-hmm.
than to ourselves 100% of the time. And so for most people, when I start teaching them self-compassion, like how do we start to rewire our brain and have these other thought patterns, this response to when we mess up or when we make mistakes, most people can't do it. They're like, I don't know how to do this. What are you even talking about? But if I say, what would you say to a dear friend who came to you with the same thing? Most of us can come up with what we would say to them.
Yeah.
And then you actually repeat that to yourself. And that might feel weird or ridiculous at first because you're so used to talking to yourself in that other way. But eventually you actually retrain your brain to like catch it and go, oh, what would I say to Jesse? What would Jesse say to me? And what can I say that to myself? So Jesse, what would you say to someone who came to you and said, I know this has happened before. I had this goal and now I'm not only not making progress, I'm actually backsliding.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you say to that person?
Yeah. You actually had hit it already, not even maybe being expert in the financial space, but your instincts were spot on. I mean, it happens more than it doesn't. There is no neat and tidy path to getting out of debt. It's always messy. And there's only one consistent theme across any number of people that have gotten out of debt successfully is that they kept trying. That is a common thread. But you'll see fits and starts that are not just days, but weeks, months, even as people kind of. It's like you're just kind of slowly circling and slowly improving. So it takes time. Yeah, absolutely. That would be very easy, and I could say it with a complete straight face, knowing it's completely true. That someone that suffers a setback like that, where they're wanting to quit, and their self is berating them, in that way. Yeah, the only thing you would say is, "Oh, this is super normal. Congratulations, you just hit the first milestone in successful debt payoff. It didn't go the way you wanted."
Yes.
Yeah.
And I imagine that your listeners might even have a little Jessie that sits on their shoulder sometimes and says that to them. So if you have to let that be the Jessie voice in your brain, that's okay. It doesn't have to be in your own voice. We think that change, when we set out to create change, that it's going to be perfect, that it's going to be this straight line up, that every month we will make our goal and we will never backslide and we'll never get hard and we will never revert to what we were doing before. But when we create space for the fact that that was never true, that's not true for anyone. Mm-hmm. And that it's a part of self-compassion is just to know that to be a human is to make mistakes. And when you make those mistakes, you're part of a collective of other people who are doing exactly the same thing as you. You're not out of the norm. You're not doing anything wrong. My guess is that those people who you have seen really do it, Jessie, who get to their goal and then beyond, they were able to access some version of this for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. I actually like that a lot. We could spend a lot of time just talking through that. Robyn, it's been a pleasure to have you on. And I want you to, tell everyone how to find you, where they can learn more. Show us your book if you have it handy. Just kind of pitch everyone on if, especially this self-compassion piece is very, I just don't think it could be said enough. So I love that we were able to kind of dive deep on that. So yeah, let everyone know how they can hear more about what you teach and what you do.
Yeah. So I'm actually, the book is here. It's called The Feel Good Effect, How Small Shifts in Thinking Create Big Change. So there's, I'm in the wellness space, but the frameworks in here are available to you regardless of what kind of change you're trying to make. There is a section in here on self-compassion, all that flexible thinking we mentioned, and gratitude, which I'm excited, Jessie, for you to keep talking about this after I'm gone from the show. Because there's some simple practices in here, and I would just be so thrilled to know that there's people in the financial space teaching this way, because not only is it science-based for sustainable change, but also, really infusing well-being for your people, because, we need that. We need to feel well in order to have that financial wellness as well. Yeah. And then I'm actually at Real Food Whole Life on the web. I started out doing a lot of food in the years ago, and so I have 500 recipes on there as well. But realfoodwholelife.com, I have some free resources on there kind of related to what we were talking about today. I have a podcast called The Feel Good Effect, anywhere you get your podcasts. And then I'm on Instagram at Real Food Whole Life.
Awesome. Excellent. Yeah, let's have everyone be a little kinder to themselves as it relates to money. I can't think of many other areas of life that can potentially carry the shame that we carry around with money. It doesn't need to be that way.
Weight, I think it's weight and money. Our bodies and our money. And yes, if you can step out of that striving shame, you'll feel better, but you'll also get the results you want.
Yeah, awesome. Robyn, thanks for jumping on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me and Robyn in that interview. I appreciate it very much. If you want to see more interviews like these, you can email me at podcast@youneedabudget.com, or you can leave a comment down below in the YouTube comment area. And if you have an author that you think we should talk to where it could relate to budgeting, behavior change, all those things, well, maybe we could reach out and have them on. Until next time, follow YNAB's 4 rules and you will win financially. You've never budgeted like this.